We are taught to believe that reward and merit are closely aligned, that many of our politicians and business leaders are where they are because of their abilities. But our next guest argues that if we properly consider the role of luck, that could change the way we think about our democracy. Here's Mark Kingwell, philosopher at the University of Toronto, and very happy to welcome you back to that chair.
Thank you. Glad to be back.
As you saw in the opening clips, I want to start with that summer of love at the Republican National Convention, where they considered this issue of whether you built it or you didn't build it. Well, let me just go back over this. Here's what Barack Obama said on the hustings July 13th in Virginia. He says, if you were successful, somebody along the line gave you some help. There was a great teacher somewhere in your life. Somebody helped to create this unbelievable American system that we have that allowed you to thrive. Somebody invested in the roads and bridges. If you've got a business, you didn't build that. Now, his syntax may not have been good, but
And the quote shouldn't really end there.
It shouldn't.
Because he goes on to talk about infrastructure and currency and all the other things that make business possible.
Exactly. So we what the president meant to say was, I think we get the idea that what he meant when he said you didn't build it, he wasn't referring to your business, he was referring to the education that your teacher got, or the roads or the bridges and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. Is it, just taking a step back, is this either or setup a useful way to view success in your view?
It's really not useful, but you can see why it's inevitable, because the fallout after Obama's comment was in some ways the most interesting moment of the entire campaign, because you had a first principles debate going on about the nature of American democracy, and if you want to extrapolate, about democracy more generally and about politics more generally. So you have these two visions which are now competing and probably at this point mutually exclusive. One is the one that is driven by individualism and by tight connection between perceived effort and perceived outcome.
So I did it all myself, you didn't help me, it's my hard work, sweat equity, pulling my socks up, all that.
And therefore, taxation is redistributive rather than distributive. Tax freedom day and so on. Government is taking what is mine and giving it to somebody else. And on the other side, you have a vision which is very familiar to Western European democracies, parts of a Canadian democracy, you might argue, which is not socialist, but socialized. And that's to say that we understand that there are public trusts that make individual lives in their particular contours possible, that there are things that are held in common and built in common, and that we depend upon others, even if it's just as the people who populate the markets that we try to colonize with our products and services, we depend upon others for whatever comes our way. So, of course, neither of them is the whole picture, and that's where I think this becomes interesting.
Neither is the whole picture, but I get the sense just from listening to you and reading your stuff that you're closer to the latter than the former.
I am, partly because the individualistic vision, the one that's been driven by this tight connection between effort and outcome, has come so to dominate the world, especially in the form of economic thinking, contract thinking, that it's become a dangerous force. And one of the ways to counter that is to try to chip away at the presumptions of that view, precisely at the level of first principles. What does it mean to be an individual? What does it mean to have what we call success? What are the actual factors that go into somebody being wealthier or more powerful than somebody else?
What do you think the underlying source of the tension is between those who believe I did it myself versus, we really are kind of all in this together and I couldn't have done it without X, Y, and Z?
Well, it's interesting how that attitude is itself unevenly distributed through populations. So it's often the people who have done very well either in their own lives or in recent generations of their families that tend to feel that, the door slammed shut behind me kind of attitude. Whereas it's people who are still striving, who have not yet succeeded, or people who have long generations of success who now want to give back. And I'm thinking of some of the American aristocracy families of the 19th centuries, the Vanderbilts, the Carnegies. Even Bill Gates now might be classed in this sort of, giving back stage. Now they see that actually, it's a web of interconnection rather than, myself against the world, everything that I get is mine.
Okay, but you also hear things like, if I was successful, I did it all myself, and if I failed, well, it wasn't my fault. Right. The deck was stacked, right? You hear that a lot, right?
Sure. So we all do these kind of double standards within our own confused thinking about this. There are lots of jokes around this kind of faulty psychology. One is, the best piece of work I ever did was being born into the right family. You know, the smartest decision I ever made.
Picking my parents.
Right. Or the old joke about the George W. Bush that he was born on third base and thought he'd hit a triple. These kinds of things try to highlight the idea that many of the strongest factors that determine outcome in terms of personal happiness, personal wealth, or success are really already decided at the moment of birth. So the Birthright Lottery, as it's sometimes called, is probably the single most important feature of human existence. And yet, for the most part, we don't pay attention to it. So then we get into this kind of doubling where we say, I did that through my own effort, that's mine, but I failed because of politics, or somebody at work hates me, or just the breaks didn't come my way. But if there's luck, which there is, it goes both ways.
Why do you think it's important to consider this relationship between luck and success?
I think the most important thing is just to give us, those of us who are blessed, who come out on the top side of the Birthright Lottery, a sense of how contingent and fragile our current happiness is, which in turn might confer upon us a greater awareness of the responsibilities we have to the whole system that made that possible, and to those people who are on the downside of the lottery. So just take Canada. To be a Canadian, to be born a Canadian, in global terms, is a winner. But to be born, say, in Nunavut, is to be, within Canadian terms, possibly a loser in that lottery within the lottery. And there are all kinds of things that have to be considered when you think about the uneven distribution of opportunities or breaks, not just goods and services. And then you can start to compensate for some of them, not all. There's an important difference between luck, which is an injustice, and luck, which is a mere misfortune. On the injustice side, you could actually have policies that would try to work against the uneven distribution of injustice. When it comes to misfortune, the best you can probably do is relief. But think about what happened to the eastern seaboard of the United States during Sandy. Very bad luck, the so-called act of God. Is that an injustice? No, not exactly. That's not something that government policy could have prevented or ameliorated. Now it can only be relieved. So you can make that kind of decision even within the realm of luck.
I'm going to follow up on that again in a second, but just before we go there, do we need to believe in the mythology that anyone can be a success provided you work hard enough?
Well, in my view, that's one of the most dangerous pieces of nonsense that's out there.
And yet we hear that all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, we're taught that from kindergarten and up.
Yeah.
You're not buying it.
I'm not buying it. I understand where it comes from, because it's that idea that you want to encourage effort. No one wants to discourage effort. It's the Homer Simpson view. Try and fail. Why bother trying again? You want people to believe, everyone, especially the young, I think, that they need to work hard to maximize their opportunities. But the idea that hard work alone will trump your original distribution of opportunities is a myth. And it's a dangerous myth if it covers over the fact that those opportunities were themselves unevenly distributed.
So we want to prick that balloon?
I do.
You do?
Yeah.
Even though some kids might need that to, if for example, you're that kid who's been born in Nunavut rather than in Forest Hill, Toronto, or the Glebe in Ottawa, you want to prick that balloon?
Well, I want to say, first of all, let's take stock of your situation. What are the things that you can affect and the things that you can't? And maybe at this point it sounds a bit more like the Serenity Prayer from Alcoholics Anonymous, right? Change the things you can, accept the things you can't, and have the wisdom to know the difference.
Let's play some tape for you right now. Robert Greene's Mastery. We've got a little book trailer for this. Just check the monitor here in the studio. Roll tape, please.
Here's the path to mastery. Enter the career path that suits your uniqueness, that sparks your deepest curiosity. Go through an apprenticeship where you master the necessary skills, learn from mentors, become socially adept. Stay focused and fluid. Know your environment inside and out. Now, creative powers will come to you, as will the command and mastery of your chosen craft. Anyone can follow these steps. The fruit of over 20,000 hours of thinking, researching, and writing on power and excellence, Mastery reveals how to become exceptional at whatever you do. How to become the best.
Okay, all you got to do is find that path, and once you find that path, you're destined for greatness.
I'm glad I wore black, because I now feel like a ninja of, craft mastery or something. I love the list of imperatives, be creative, follow your flow, or whatever. I mean, it's just, all of that stuff, it's amazing that we've gone through several cycles of this kind of thing in business publishing and self-help books and so on. And it just keeps coming back around. And the reason it keeps coming back around is because this idea itself is a kind of aspirational good. So what's being sold here is not success. What's being sold here is the idea that you could achieve success if you buy my book. And so, I mean, it's working for Green because he's figured out the way to monetize his market, right? You don't monetize the market by going out and succeeding in his terms. You go out and monetize the market by creating the book that tells you about success.
Do you know him at all?
No.
No. So do you think he's being that cynical about this?
I don't know that it's cynicism. I think that it's, in some economic sense, it's perfectly rational. You know, it's the same thing that when we talk about Chris Anderson being an advocate for free everything, I don't think he's cynical about that. I think he sincerely believes it. But when you turn it around and you point out that he's the one who's monetizing all of the rhetoric about free, then
There's an irony there.
There's an irony, at the least.
Glenn Gould, you know something about this guy. Published a book on him a few years ago, yes?
Yeah.
A great Canadian pianist. Why was he such a success?
Gould is a fascinating case, and for all the reasons that we're talking about, because it's not political, but it is about the distribution of talents and opportunities. So Gould creates a kind of, or has created around him a kind of persona of peculiar genius.
Eccentricity.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
And all the things that people know, the humming and the crouching over the keyboard in his weird chair. And everyone's written about this stuff when it comes to Gould. But Gould's real achievement, when you look at it, is not so much his talent as a musician, because surely he was not the only talented musician in the pool of living musicians during his lifetime. He may have been way up in the percentiles. His true genius was actually the way he managed to understand recorded music as an opportunity for scalable effects in distributing his music.
Scalable effects being?
So you do one recording and then you sell it as many times as you can. As opposed to each time you want to sell a recording, you have to go to a room with a paying audience and sell a recording one at a time. Yeah, you do it once, sell it possibly infinite times, so that you scale the effect. And what Gould understood, maybe intuitively, because all the stuff he writes about recorded music is about technology and bringing music into the home and out of the concert hall, and why he hated the concert hall. You know, famously he stopped performing in the early 1960s. But meanwhile, he was selling gazillions of records, gazillions. And he really understood that that was the future of music. He even saw the next phase, which he didn't live to think about, which was when distribution of music becomes virtually costless, when you don't even need vinyl or tape, you have MP3s. And in the little chronology that I included in my book on Gould, I included the year the MP3 technology was patented and the invention of the iPod, because that changed then the scalable effect of music even more. Now you can't monetize the distribution. You have to monetize something else. And Gould didn't live to try to figure that out. I wonder, would he have been forced to go back to the concert hall in order to cope with that?
Everybody else is.
Everybody else.
Yeah.
You know, the Radiohead model, as it's sometimes called. Right?
But the inference I'm drawing from you is that you think there may be more talented or deserving people out there who just didn't quite figure out what he figured out.
We'll never know. But there's nothing in the music itself that proves that there isn't, or that there wasn't. That's the point. That, of course, he was immensely talented and he has all these things, but I think a lot of contemporary Canadian musician who's also known for her interpretations of the same canon, Angela Hewitt, whose Goldberg Variations, Gould's most famous recording, many people consider superior, but she will never have the position in the music world or the cultural world that Glenn Gould did. It was because he was born at this moment, because he understood something about recording and loved recording, and because he was able to take advantage of all those things at that time.
And so he's got a theater named after him on Front Street with a statue on a bench.
Yeah.
There you go.
And I want to say, I take nothing, in my admiration for Gould's musicianship is undiminished, as it should be.
Let's come back to politics here. What does luck have to do with a politician's success?
Well, a great deal. We've seen this in study after study, but I always trace it back to Max Weber, who wrote about charisma and its role in the social world. And nowadays, you know, you see these interesting studies that if you're below a certain height as a male politician, your success rate drastically diminishes. So you'd be good. You're a tall guy if you want to go into politics. Because why? Because people like tall people. They find them charismatic and powerful and commanding.
The tall guy usually beats the short guy.
Usually. He usually does. Yeah, he usually does. I mean, there was Nicolas Sarkozy, who was a charismatic short guy. So there are there's some of those out there. But so the luck of those kinds of things, which seem purely irrelevant to politics, to your judgment. I mean, how tall you are, or how good looking you are, is also a huge factor in how successful you be in politics. Which again, you might think is irrelevant.
Okay, I'm somewhat offended that you say as a tall guy I'd have a good shot at politics, but when you mentioned good looking, you didn't say a thing.
It was implied.
Oh, okay, yeah. Good. Well, this is not a new discussion, because Thomas Jefferson, nearly 250 years ago, was saying things like, "I'm a great believer in luck, and I find the harder I work, the more I have of it." So, do we make our own luck?
Well, Jefferson's a nice example of the original spirit of that individualism we were talking about later, and that's why he's an American hero, because what he's suggesting is there's no luck of the old anti-democratic kind, where you happen to be born aristocratic and I happen to be born a serf. Mm-hmm. Now we're equalizing that luck of birth, and now it's much more about hard work. Of course, you can never equalize the luck of birth entirely. You can flatten it, for sure, and that's what democracy has to offer, among other things, over aristocracy. But Jefferson is he's indulging in a kind of self-congratulation, because he was a self-made man in many ways. But he also died hugely in debt, and there are all kinds of other things that he got wrong. So.
What's the line, though? Somebody's got that great line about never has such a great collection of people all gathered in one place, save and except for the time when Thomas Jefferson dined alone in the White House. I mean, he was lucky and brilliant.
Yes.
And I guess unlucky at the end, too.
He was. So, in a way, what Jefferson's example shows us, along with a lot of other people, is what Machiavelli wrote about, the rise and fall of fortune, the fortune's wheel concept, which we associate with early modern or even medieval worldviews, but actually is really powerful as a reminder that it's maybe even goes back further to the Stoics, that when you're on top, you shouldn't take any more credit for that than you should give yourself a hard time when you're on the bottom. Mm-hmm. It's all something, turning in the universe. And of course, you can make marginal gains and losses depending on what you actually do, but they are marginal compared to the overall picture.
Mark, what do you want to call that? That you just call it a kind of the thing that's turning in the universe. Some people are going to call that divinity. Some people are going to call it just whatever. What do you call it?
Well, I myself don't think that it has any sort of overarching direction or purpose. So when people use words like fate, for example, or what you hear a lot of times today is everything happens for a reason.
Yes.
Which always kind of gets up my nose. There's no reason. It's just everything happens.
Everything happens, period.
So I would call it fortune. I think fortune, if we remember the roots in this idea of the wheel of fortune, figured as a goddess, of course, in that earlier worldview, but the secular version of fortune is what we all contend with. And on the political side, if we remember that, we start to loosen some of these hardened attitudes about why people deserve things or don't deserve them, who's responsible, equality, all these things that we talk about. Actually, underneath it is a kind of roiling sea of fortune.
Let's cover off one more angle here. We live in a market economy, but you talk to us about the need to move to a gift economy. What does that mean?
Well, gift economy is just a loose idea to capture all of those exchanges between humans that are not contracts or transactions. And every market economy, every transactional economy that we know of has had some kind of gift economy around it or behind it. And some cultures, potlatch in Haida Gwaii, for example, is a pure gift economy, just paying forward. There's no accumulation. There's no such thing as wealth. What I want to argue is that democracy should be more like a gift economy than like a market economy. It should not be swapping your taxes for services or resenting the government taking what's yours to give to somebody else. It should be about the gift that we keep giving to each other of the trust, of the commitment that you and I built that. And we all take credit for it. And of course, there are going to be some things that we carve off as private, but we start with the public thing, the res publica, and then we go from there.
Gotcha. Thank you for helping me build this interview.
My pleasure.
That's Mark Kingwell from the U of T.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.